This week on Buffering, we're talking about how the broadband market has shifted from a growth first land grab to a retention experience and relationship game where the winners will be those who can defend the subscriber relationship as competition intensifies. And Gabe, I have to welcome you to the new buffering studio. I know you're still a few hundred miles away, but one upgrade at a time.
I, I I love it, man. It's awesome. I know you're excited to have moved. I know moving is the worst thing to do in the entire world. I really hope I never have to move with kids because that sounds like an absolute nightmare. But moving in general sucks. But it is cool for you to be in your new spot, man. It's looking a little sparse, but I think that's
It's
okay. You can start to fill it in as time goes by.
it's
But
it's a
it's got
work
to
in
feel good.
progress.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
still
it's
need
fine.
that neon buffering sign. I think that would complete the studio.
Oh, it looks so good. Just a big neon buffering sign right along that big, nice long wall right behind your head. That would be pretty epic.
I think so. It would be like the episode of The Office where Michael gets that neon sign and puts up in his dining room, and you just see like the glow of the light.
You need to get a tiny plasma screen TV like he had as well. What was that, like 19-inch plasma screen or something that he gets all
Oh my
mad
gosh,
about? Such a good
I
episode. I haven't seen that in forever.
I you know me being a tech savvy individual I am. I know my TVs, and right now I've got a 75-inch OLED, but the 20-inch from The Office was just as good, I'm sure. But
That was such a good episode. But
it,
anyway, I digress. Yeah, it is cool to see you in your new spot, in your new digs, man. I'm happy you've got your own dedicated office now, just for work, just for podcasts. It's going to be great. I think you're going to be very happy with having your own dedicated space.
I like how I told you this was my podcast studio before I told you it was my new office. But Gabe, as part of
Uh,
moving, I had to switch to a new internet provider, which is like the only downside, if you will. And that's only because the experience with my previous provider was so great. But that's kind of the angle I want to take on today's podcast. I mentioned there in the beginning, the retention experience, the relationship game, the increased competition as well. And just this past weekend, there was news, and we've talked about this in the past, but it's finally here. Amazon announced that they have enough satellites in space to begin to provide service. Now, it's not going to be like the global, widespread service. I think their competition has, thinking SpaceX has today. As they get started, it might be regionally locked or in specific markets. But we're finally at that point where Amazon is ready to turn on their latest project, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next. We still don't know pricing plans or how they plan to really launch this, but
I
over
am
the past
so
few
curious
years,
about that, Zach.
yeah,
I
over the
am
past few years, we've
just
been building up
dying to
and
see that.
saying that this will be a threat, and I
hmm
think we're finally at the point where we're going to see how big of a threat this actually is.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. It's very interesting to see this all come together now, and them actually be able to really start to roll out services in a meaningful way. And they still have a lot of work to do for sure. To your point, it's not at the level of Starlink or some of the other competitors, that they're dealing with from a satellite perspective. But this was a pretty big first step for them. And again, I am so curious to see what they do from a go-to-market perspective. It's going to be very interesting to see what the prices are, what the bundles are, those sorts of things. And where I think this lends itself to the overall conversation today, Zach, is I'm sure you've been feeling this as well, but it seems to me that the conversation has really aggressively shifted in the conversations that I'm having with customers and the industry in general of what people were focused on before from a build perspective and how they're now needing to shift the way that they run their businesses to really focus on, okay, how do I grow when I'm no longer building? I had this exact conversation with a customer today, but it's not the first one I've had. I've been having many of these conversations recently, over the past few months, especially, where people are, again, shifting from that build mode to how do we monetize these network investments that we've made. Are you seeing the same thing?
100%, Gabe. And I mentioned the increased competition here a minute ago too, and it's just adding, more to that conversation at this point.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the big question here is this something cyclical where there's just this cyclical pressure of what's, being turned up on the industry, or is it a new structural reality for what we're going to operate in? I certainly have my opinions. I would be curious to hear yours.
Yeah.
Which one of those do you think, which one of those worlds do you think we're in?
I think the industry has has slowly been building up to this point where the entire industry is about to be broken up and redefined. And how we go to market or how we operate as CXPs in this market is going to be very different than what we've seen in the past. Everything that, Gabe, we've seen for the past 20 plus years, everything we've seen for the past 5 years is going to change. I had to look this up here, Gabe, but Starlink, they've only had been adding subscribers since I want to say 2019. That's not that long ago. But if you think about how much has changed since that point in time, we talked about Amazon, Leo, how much is going to change with them in the market now? The market is changing, and I don't see it slowing down or reverting back to what we saw 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Hmm. I completely agree. And I know one of the kind of general theme of this episode today, Zach, is, if we have to look out 5 years, what does the industry look like? And we'll talk about that as we get a little bit further
Are
into
you gonna
this
make a
discussion.
prediction, Gabe? Do we get to, like,
I feel
crystal
like
ball
we're going
this
to have
out?
to. I
Oh,
mean,
man. Well,
yeah,
Gabe, what was the signal that, like, what started this to begin with? What happened
yeah,
that changed the industry?
it's a good question. I don't think it's necessarily one signal, but I would say that the biggest shift that I've seen in the conversation that's been happening recently is it used to be that the primary metric in our industry was how many homes were passed with fiber. That was the thing. It was, if you went to any industry event, 2 years ago, it was how many homes did we pass? How many homes did we pass? How many homes did we pass? That was the key metric. And now we're at the point where people are really shifting aggressively to take rate as the conversation and understanding that those take rates have really started to plateau, especially in areas where people were building fiber aggressively. And there are fewer and fewer areas to build new fiber, right? Like it's certainly we've got BEAD and everything that's happening there. I think that's its own kind of unique beast. But to me, the signal that's really happened here is that conversation that started to shift from homes passed to take rate. That was the thing that really started to change the game. And I would say one other thing to add to that is the other piece that's come along with that is more aggressive discounts in those fiber overbuilder markets where people have been historically doing very well because they were building new fiber into areas. They were able to get customers switched over. They didn't have to be aggressive from a discounting perspective. And now they do. In order to get people excited to shift, the discounts have come out. And that to me is probably the biggest signal that we're in this different era than what we've been over the past few years.
I agree. So let's look at this 5-year picture a little bit more and kind of figure out who survives and why. And there was a LinkedIn post I saw a few weeks ago from John Pico. And one of the things he mentioned was you can't advertise your way to a good customer experience, right?
I love
And
that post. That was so spot on.
I love it so much, but it kind of leads into our first topic here of the providers who are most likely to win are not the ones that are simply offering or building the best networks. They're going to be the ones with the strongest subscriber relationships, the clearest value story, the most intentional retention strategy. They're not the ones who are just advertising their way to a good customer experience.
And this is the shift that I think we're starting to see, and we need to continue to see, Zach, in the providers that we're working with. For a long time, when we talked to people about churn, the answer was we don't have a churn problem. And it was the answer would be, well, tell us a little bit about why people churn. Well, the only reason people churn is because they move. We've talked ad nauseum about, the moving thing in the past and whether people are actually telling the truth there. But
As I just
regardless,
told my BSP, no, I'm seriously moving.
no, really, I swear I'm moving.
Aren't you the
I'm
guy
moving to
from aren't you the guy from buffering?
Thankfully, we're not that well known, so we're okay. You can still lie to your provider. But in this case, you actually were moving, and you were moving into an area that didn't have their service. So it's just like the one of the few instances where this was actually true. But again, we'd ask customers questions about about churn and about some of the challenges that they were having there, and they weren't really concerned about it. And I think this is one of those situations where it's much better to be proactive in your strategy when it comes to churn mitigation than reactive in your strategy once you start to have a problem. If you're seeing any indication that churn is ticking up, even if it's a couple of percentage points or a couple of basis points, to use our fancy finance terms, if you're seeing any indication that that's starting to go in the wrong direction, it's so important to get on that immediately because it's such a harbinger for potentially challenging days ahead.
And Gabe, I think it goes back to two things. Number one, I remember years ago, this is probably, back when I started here at Calix 5 years ago. I remember, Starlink was new at the time. And you talk to a lot of these providers, they're like, oh no, we're the local provider. We don't see it as a threat, or like it's too expensive. That conversation has totally shifted. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
every call, Gabe. It's this is my number one threat right now. The hardware is now largely free, or I think they have like a rental fee now each month, but it's still very cheap. But the second part of this, Gabe, is how easy it is to switch. The fact I can go to Home Depot, go to Walmart, go online and buy with just a couple clicks, that single landing page. Um, there's it's like I said, it's too easy to switch to. So once you
Mm-hmm.
move over to an experience like that, in the let's call it the customer experience is ideal or is exceptional, it's going to be very difficult for you to win back said subscribers. They'd have to be very unhappy to unchurn. Is that the term?
Yeah, rechurn. I don't know. I don't know what the
I
right
don't,
term is
I don't
there.
know.
Yeah, we'll come up with the best term. Well, so let me ask this, Zach. If you think about the providers that we would bet on to be successful when we look out in 5 years' time, you talked about 2019. We're actually a little over 5 years from that. But if we look out to 2031, what are the things that providers who are going to be successful have in common today that they are doing to set them up for success in 5 years?
I mean, number one that comes to mind, and this might be a given because we just talked about it recently, Gabe, but on that note is I don't think consumers necessarily are going to care about the technology itself as much as we would like them to, or as much as we have in the past. I say we collectively, not we as Gabe and I. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. We talked about this a few weeks ago, where why is satellite suddenly cool? Why? What happened? How did we go from fiber back to satellite? So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And then I mentioned the e-commerce giant Amazon coming into the picture, and it's not just Amazon, it's these tech companies wanting the piece of this as well. Gabe, I think we're going to see increased pressure over the next 6 to 12 months with mobile providers and broadband. And you can kind of read between the lines of what I'm, hinting at there. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more in the future, but I think that's going to be the next competitive threat. You have these tech companies, these e-commerce giants building, their own infrastructure, getting into the game as well, without having to lay a single foot of fiber in the ground, which is what our industry has traditionally relied on with those homes passed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that brings up a really good point. And this is, again, something we've discussed on previous episodes. But if you are waiting to get a proper e-com solution in place for the future, that's not a recipe for success. That
Oh, I
needs to be
hate waiting,
something that's
Gabe.
done
There
now.
should be no waiting.
Well, and we can't expect that our customers are going to wait. And again, you said this a moment ago, but if it's easier to buy from another provider, if that barrier has been lowered, then that could be a reason that somebody goes with said provider. And so when I look at, what are the ones that I'm going to be betting on to be successful in 2031, they're the ones who, if they don't have an e-com platform in place now, they better freaking go get one right like immediately to make sure that they're set up. And Not just an e-com platform, but a modern e-com platform,
You
something
know,
that actually makes it easy for somebody to buy your service.
you know what I don't think we've talked about, Gabe, is a few weeks ago, uh, I I don't remember how I found this, if it was from competitive research or if I was ordering dinner on DoorDash, but I found a national provider is offering same day, might not even same day, call it 2 hour less or immediate delivery of equipment to set up service. This is on DoorDash. You can get, food within 20 minutes or less. Well, now you can get broadband in 20 minutes or less without leaving your house. That's how easy it's becoming to switch. Forget about Starlink, forget about that one click buyer experience. Buying internet service through DoorDash.
That's wild. I don't think we did talk about that on the podcast. I do remember you mentioning that to me. I think you might have just texted it to me, but it's again, it's approaching these things in a creative way. How can we get people signed up, very, very rapidly? I had a customer tell me a few weeks ago, and I thought this was a really good idea. They do door-to-door sales. Well, if you're sending out people doing door-to-door sales, that's an expensive strategy. And unfortunately, what can happen a lot is that people will cancel the service in between the time that the door-to-door salesperson shows up and the install tech is going out there to actually do the install. So what they did is they actually had their install techs going around with the door-to-door salespeople, which I thought was so brilliant because if somebody signed up, they'd be like, sounds great. I've got the person right here. They can come, they can come
Yeah.
hook you up immediately. And I loved that approach. I thought it was really smart. And obviously, that takes a fair amount of coordination. It obviously takes the resources to be able to do that. But I thought it was such a smart way to lower the barrier for entry for people. And to your point about the DoorDash piece, like that's an extreme example, but that is something that people need to think about. How is it that I can get people hooked up as rapidly as possible? And again, when I look at the companies that are going to be succeeding in 5 years, it's the ones who are giving people choice. It's not just the ones who are, doing this really high touch tech install. There's going to be a whole subset of your customers or prospects that are interested in doing that. There's also a whole subset of people who don't want that at all, and they just want to do it themselves. So how do you approach both of those groups? You can't just assume that everybody wants that high touch install. It's how do I approach these two different groups in different ways? And if you're not solving that problem now, you're going to be in a really tough spot in 5 years when the people who are the younger generation than Zach, who Zach really doesn't want to talk to people, and that group really, really doesn't want to talk to people. So if you're not, setting yourself up for success now, you're going to be in a really, really tough spot.
I have a funny story here, Gabe. But back to moving because we haven't beaten that stick enough here today.
beating
But
that stick with our dead horse.
but yeah, when I was moving, I contacted my BSP, told them I was actually moving, and I did make that joke on the phone. I was like, "Oh, I'm actually moving," but they told me to pack up my ONT and my router that they provided, and they gave me a shipping
Did you
label
say
to
what's
send
an
it back.
ONT? Mhm.
Well, I should have, but luckily I knew what I was doing. But it went back to as I was moving out at the lobby of my building, there was a large box from a national provider with their logo on the side, and I thought, okay, whomever's moving in next, whether it was my unit or a different unit in that building, somehow went with a large cable provider over the local fiber provider, and here I am carrying my equipment out that I was just told to box up, and I thought, had that ONT been left in the building or, even the router itself, it's another opportunity to be, move in on day one and say, oh, I can activate service immediately. I don't have to wait. Or I'm seeing one of my siblings move through this too of, oh, I can't set up my smart TV. I can't set up this or I can't do this because I don't get internet until Thursday. And I scheduled this out 2 weeks ago. But you see this and then you think, my sister, she could have Starlink today. She could have DoorDash internet in an hour. You start to have these conversations. You think of what that customer experience looks like. And these are not like wild card examples that just like randomly exist in the market. These are things that exist today and that providers are actually doing. This is what you are competing with today. And it
Mhm.
it goes back to one of my favorite thoughts here is yes, you might be the local provider, but that local provider mindset, that local provider advantage only wins if the experience, from install to retention is meaningfully better. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm the local provider, cross your fingers and hope for the best." It doesn't work when you're competing with these exceptional customer experiences. And don't forget, we talk about this every time we do an episode on AI. These tech companies have the resources to build and to do a lot of this in real time. You
Hmm.
have AI, you might be able to maybe not match that or maybe not, propel your business at that same pace, but you have the resources to build or to evolve alongside these large giants.
Yep. And I'm so glad you mentioned experience because it does remind me of a topic that I wanted to make sure we circle back to, and that is the in-home subscriber experience. And when I say that, I'm specifically talking about Wi-Fi and the overall solution that's kind of wrapped around Wi-Fi, managed services that are wrapped around Wi-Fi. It has never been more important to deliver a rock solid Wi-Fi experience. And the reason I say that is because we're at the point where the broadband pipe really isn't the problem anymore. We're pushing much faster speeds, even with the satellite providers, they're going to be pushing much faster speeds.
And how
So
much speed do you actually need in your house?
exactly right,
Like
like
your
it's
iPhone is
it's
not getting 10 gig internet. Like let's be honest here.
correct, exactly. So as people move into these higher speed tiers, their expectations increase, and if you're not providing that solid Wi-Fi experience for customers, that's where things are going to fall down. That is the one area where I see so much benefit from a tech install, from a really hands-on white glove tech install, is you can make sure that that's a rock solid Wi-Fi experience before you leave that customer's home. I think that is one of the big challenges with self-install. There's certainly lots of benefits, Zach, as we were just talking about, that immediacy of being, or almost immediacy of being able to get that service turned up very rapidly. But you are relying on a non-technical person to handle a technical problem. And if they're like, to go to your example, you're living in this apartment building now that
Oh, I've
has
got a good
multiple
example
stories.
coming up for you, Gabe.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Well, I'll let you tell your
I
story.
gotta
But
skip into
I
this because this is a good story here. This is all real. This is all like stuff that's happened in the past week. Like this is like an honest example. And being in the industry, I can solution my way out of this. But if I wasn't, technically inclined in this space, Gabe, I would have no idea what I was doing. I installed my modem and my router, 10 feet from me, and I'm in the basement. I have a living space above me. I have a third floor too. But then I have this cabinet with all the wiring in it. But in that cabinet, there was an old Netgear router that they were using as a switch. Now it's a router, so it also has Wi-Fi in it. But they were using it as a switch to get service across the house. But here I am. I installed my equipment in my basement. What do you think the signal of that experience is like on the top floor of my house, Gabe? Because I'll tell you right now, it's not good. By the way, when I walk out
I'm
to my
sure.
garage, I totally lose it. So these are problems that my provider has no idea that I'm faced with. But again, me being in the industry, I can put I can put a Gigaspire here. I can put my outdoor unit. I can solution around this. Meanwhile, my provider has never once contacted me saying like, "Hey, we noticed your signal strength is low." They've never once had this conversation with me, and I think that's a very valuable touch point because had I not solutioned this, the way I did, I would be frustrated. I would be wherever outside or upstairs, having issues streaming, uploading, gaming. I do a lot of cloud gaming still. But I know that having my router in this basement closet is not the best spot. But again, self install, where else could I put it? There. They never came to my home. They never knew what my experience was like. No one's contacted me about it. Um, I did remove the Netgear router, by the way. That is no longer that is no longer in the cabinet. But it just shows you, that self install there are touch points, and if you have the data on this, it's what better time to make sure that
Hmm.
the post install experience is exceptional. Now, of course,
Hmm.
I did think like prior to getting service, I was like, well, if I just put Starlink on my front porch and like use that until I get service, or like how do I bridge this gap, right? But I got my equipment from FedEx, of course, a day earlier than I was hoping, which was nice. There was still a waiting period to get that equipment, but I think we're also dealing with a generation. I say this all the time: is I like things yesterday. I don't want to wait. I want an exceptional experience today. And if that means self-install, I'll be willing to make that happen. But again, that's not everyone with that technical expertise. And
Yep.
you can get frustrated setting equipment up. Not everyone wants. I think the term here, Gabe, is everyone has their own definition of what a white glove install is,
Mm, hmm.
or what they'd expect, and it's never been under more of a threat than I think today with all these new providers and all these unique experiences that are being tested in the market.
Hmm. Yeah, and I can't remember if you said this on the podcast or if it was before we started, but I think you said you have a 1.5 gig speed. Like, again, broadband pipe, not the problem. If there's going to be any experience issue, it's because you have a
Inside your
complicated
home.
living environment with multiple floors. You need to have great connectivity in your basement because that's where you work. You also want to have great connectivity in the other areas of your home, and even to an extent outside of your home with the garage area as well. Like, but again, that's an area where if we're able to reach out to the customer proactively. How many times have you heard a provider say, Zach, I feel like we have these conversations all the time. We talk about some of these proactive ways to address support. Well, we don't want to bother the customer.
Well, you're
Really.
bothering me with a monthly bill, so if that's the touch point you insist on having with me, so be it. But it's a terrible excuse. I mean,
It's a
think of the
terrible
best
excuse.
brands and think of the best brands. Think of the best emails that come to your inbox. And I always tell people, look outside the industry. Look to see what other people are doing. And that's exactly where I think the best examples come from. Like the
Hmm.
reality, Gabe, is you're not going to find like the best in class marketing example from a broadband provider. Like you could be that. You could be that example, and we encourage you to be said example. But our industry is not known for necessarily having these innovative, these personal experiences. And if you have the data and the insights to do this, you should absolutely be taking advantage of this and setting the model.
Hmm.
Don't tell me, oh, I want to be like this company. Be that company. Be better than that company. There's only one of those companies. How are you going to differentiate and be the best provider in your market? That's really what it comes down to.
Completely agree. And I have to circle back to a conversation a comment you made earlier about the MDU piece and you actually dropping off your ONT as you were moving out of your building. This is another area where when I look out, 5 years, the providers that are going to be successful are the ones that are thinking about new revenue streams right now. And that could be MDU, that could be business services, business managed services, those sorts of things. But just to hit on that MDU example, why I'm going to try and use nice language here, but why, for goodness sake, would a provider want you to take out the equipment from your home so that it makes it harder for them to sell that service to the next person who
Mind
moves
you,
in?
they're going to roll another truck to the next person that moves in too. Like this issue compounds. And by the
Oh my
way,
gosh,
they
such a
knew
terrible idea.
my address, they knew my unit number, they knew it was an MDU, they knew everything. Yet when I called in to churn or called in to cancel, on whatever term you want to use here, got the broadband mindset going here.
Yeah, get the industry
Got to
mindset
separate the
going.
broadband marketer from the consumer. But when I called in, I told you, Gabe. Do you remember how I told? I think the first thing I said to you was that was so easy. It was way
Mm,
too easy for me to churn. There was no questions. It was I'm moving. Pack up your equipment. We sent you a label. Whomever's moving into that apartment, like I said, the big cable box was in the lobby, whether it was my unit or not. I should have never seen that box in there. It should have never
no.
been an option. Um, and that's all I'll say about that building.
Yeah, and I know MDU gets complicated. You've got bulk, you've got retail, you got all kinds of different rules by state.
And this, by the
And
way, this
I'm
did not have either of those. So that situation was unique.
yeah, and like I said, I just don't understand why a provider would ever want you to send back an ONT. The cost of getting the ONT back, it seems to me, does not offset the potential benefit of signing up a new customer by keeping that equipment in place. And like you said, then they're doing another truck roll to get that person signed up if they do happen to, find your old provider and get them signed up. There's just so many easy ways to tackle that problem. QR codes in the, in the unit where people can get signed up immediately.
QR
There's
code on the ONT. I mean,
correct.
well,
There's
the funniest
providers that
thing
have been
about
doing
this,
that for a decade.
yeah, the funniest thing about this building was someone in that building had satellite TV, and like there was a dish like in the alley, like pointed up, and all I could ever think was like, who has
Uh,
satellite TV? in 2026 when we have fiber and, all these other options to the building. But
Yeah,
long story
seriously.
long here, Gabe, the experience of how do I compete with DoorDash? How do I compete with these same day installs? That was just another example I had recently of what we actually see out there. And is it a mistake that you're making, that you listening to the podcast, or is it a mistake you've seen? How can we make that right? But anyway, Gabe, that aside, I want to talk about the winners now.
Yes, let's do
What
it.
what is the most underrated move that you see the winners in the broadband space doing today?
I mean, it gets back to a lot of what we were just talking about, Zach, of really thinking deeply about the experience. And
Can I
it's
just add one
also,
thing there, Gabe?
please.
I think you made this comment a few episodes ago, but you said something along the lines of put yourself in the shoes of your consumer. Go through your checkout process, go through this entire process of buying service. I think it's the same thing here. Take yourself out of the broadband space, put yourself into the consumer space. How does that customer experience fit you? How does that work for you? I think you said it best with that is if you really think about the experience you have with not only broadband companies but other companies as well, what stands out? What did you like? What did you dislike? What made you frustrated? What
Mhm.
pain points exist? If you can identify these early on, it's setting yourself up for success.
100%. And I think taking that step back just in general, not just for, hey, staple yourself to the order. I think we talked about that with Val a number of months back when we had him on the
Mhm.
podcast. It's something that the Dell was really famous for, of what are all of these touch points that happen through the journey. But it's not just staple yourself to the order, go through the actual buy flow, do all of those things, but it starts even before that. How is a customer actually going to find you? And we've talked about AI search a bit, Zach, on previous episodes as well. But this is another scenario where it's so important now more than ever to go back and do this research to understand how you're showing up from an AI search perspective.
Mhm.
If somebody, goes into Google AI mode, goes into ChatGPT, goes into Perplexity, what are they going to find when they say, who is the best internet service provider in Laramie, Wyoming? Or how does X provider compare to Y provider in Laramie, Wyoming? Those are the types of things that you need to do as a marketer to understand what is coming back and how you are actually showing up. And it's quite easy to do that. And Zach, I think you and I have both created tools that, one, allow somebody to do that fairly easily. Think about what prompts might make sense. I did one a couple of weeks ago for a customer. They're uh, they're in an area. They're in an area with a college, in fact, but similar to you, right? You've got University of Wyoming there. They're in an area with another large school. And one of the questions I asked in the analysis that we did was, who is the best internet service provider for students in this community? And the answers that came back were quite interesting. And this provider had actually done a really good job because they had a whole page that was set up on their website specifically for apartments and MDUs, which
I was
were
gonna say, I
obviously
imagine that's
focused
a
on
very MDU focused market.
100%. It's a very MDU focused market. So they had a whole page on their website that was very focused on all of the things that they're doing in apartments, why they're the best provider for MDUs, things like that. So that question, they actually showed up very well because they'd done the work to go off and think really deeply about, okay, who are the customers that we're trying to sell to in this market? What are the questions that they're going to be asking? And how are we going to show up in that particular scenario? But I've seen the flip side of that as well, where people are not showing up in a very positive light because they haven't thought about those things, and there's a lot of opportunity to improve how they're showing up from an AI search visibility perspective. So not just the buy process, but also even starting before that, how are you actually showing up in these AI search engines? I cannot encourage people to do that more. Take 8 prompts, go run it through each one of those platforms, use AI to analyze the results, and I think you're going to be pretty shocked by what you see and what you
And
find.
use AI to determine how you can improve your SEO, GEO. I even heard a few weeks ago, I
Exactly.
was on a call to customer, they made a comment like about SEO being dead. And I corrected them because it's not. Like yes, things are evolving, GEO. Like yes, like AI is taking a chunk here, but it's still very important to focus on these
hmm
things. Um Gabe,
Well, and
as we
and the things the things that are good for GEO were
Good for
also
SEO.
good for SEO. So
It's
it's
a
a
new way of thinking.
virtuous cycle.
And as we kind of wrap up here, Gabe, I feel like we've talked about a lot of boring stuff today. We've talked about churn. Actually, we talked about churn reduction, which I'd argue is exciting, but we talked about churn. We talked about lifecycle campaigns, subscriber experience with the app, the in-home experience, proactive support, proactive outreach. This stuff kind of sounds boring on paper, but again, I keep going back to if you start to think about what your favorite companies are doing, how you communicate with your favorite brands, it's the same for you. And Gabe, I think we might die on this hill at some point, but I think we have so many websites out there, specifically broadband websites, that are just very poor quality, just the worst websites we've ever seen. And all I can think of is no one from your company going to these websites? Like, is your leadership, is your marketing department, whomever, is no one going to your website and then going off to, Apple, Rivian, Tesla, any of these, e-commerce giants out there that we've talked about on the podcast in the past and saying, oh, that's a really cool experience, a really nice experience. And I, as much as we talk about, like I said, these boring topics, if you think about the actual business impact, and I don't want to say how easy it is to build a customer experience, but how you as an organization can take a look at your own processes or your own experience and again, the experience of your competition and think how you can be better. That's really where we should be starting today. And that's like we said, that's where the winners are heading today.
Mhm.
You're not going to be better than Amazon, right? I think we can all agree you're not going to beat this $1 trillion company overnight, but you can absolutely build a better customer experience or build a better relationship with your local markets than they can with you. Gabe, the MDU example you just mentioned, I've had similar conversations, but I've never seen a national provider come in on a hyper personalized level and have that conversation in the market. This is a great opportunity. Stop saying that you're going to be or you are this local provider and show it. Show us that you are the local provider, that you know about the MDU market, you know about the students, you know about the retirement, community or whatever you may have here, these specific neighborhoods, and use the data, use the insights you have to build that customer experience. You're not going to advertise your way to be the next Amazon. You're not going to advertise your way to have this exceptional customer experience, but you can absolutely build that.
The local piece, I couldn't agree with you more because these local providers have that local understanding of what's going on in the market. That MDU example in the college town, I thought is a really good one. I've seen other providers do this really well by calling out the specific neighborhoods that they're offering service in, and providing a little bit of detail about those neighborhoods. The nice thing about that, going back to the SEO GEO conversation, those are also things that work really well from both a GEO and an SEO perspective. So virtuous cycle there. I think that what I keep thinking about here, Zach, is the danger to me is not a sudden collapse. It's unlikely that you're going to lose all of your customers to a competitor in the next 6 months, right? Like that's just not realistic.
It's a slow
However,
burn, Gabe.
it's a slow erosion of trust. And it happens because of underinvesting in the relationship. And the risk to me of that slow burn, that slow erosion, is you don't notice it as much. When it's
it's,
happening
it's the
slowly
leaky
over
faucet in the
time,
basement, right?
exactly, that all of a sudden fills the entire thing. And you don't notice it when it's one drip. But over time, a few years go by and all of a sudden it's a real problem. The basement's
Can I
flooded.
can I add one thing as we close this, Gabe? We often talk about marketing to your promoters. Your promoters are your best salespeople and why you should be doing this. And I think we have to realize that your competitors are doing this too. As soon as a subscriber churns and moves to Starlink or another provider and they have a good experience, that starts to echo. That becomes louder. They start telling people about this as well. And that threat grows. And then again, you who maybe your only touch point with your customers is that monthly bill that we talked about. It becomes even more of a problem. It's that leaky faucet of churn. So, Gabe, I think this was a fantastic episode. There's so much in this episode that I'd love to break down further. I know we're coming up on time here. We've hinted at a lot of this in the past as well, but I think never have these topics been more important. We're seeing the tech giants, we're seeing new competition. What does your business look like in 5 years? What did it look like 5 years ago? And I think these are very exciting topics. So much positive we can do in the industry, Gabe, but you're not going to get there by waiting.
Well, and the 5 years ago versus 5 years in the future, I think is actually a really good, a really good way to end this episode, Zach. Because if we look back 5 years, the market was very different. Everybody was building very aggressively, and so the growth strategy was: I'm going to get funding, I'm going to build into these new areas, and I'm going to get to a certain take rate because I'm bringing a new solution into this market. That playbook doesn't work anymore, and so if we look out over the next 5 years, we have to think about a different playbook because the everything has shifted underneath us. The foundation has shifted underneath us. To go back to the conversation at the beginning of this, when we were talking about, homes passed for a number of years, we now have to think about different metrics in our business. So I hope everybody takes that away from this conversation is the playbook that worked over the last 5 years is absolutely not going to be the playbook that works over the next 5 years. And so we need to think deeply about what those touch points are for our customers and how we use those to improve the relationship.
Absolutely. And Gabe, I know we're out of time here. Again, thank you for joining me in the new podcast studio. We're getting closer. I'm just a little bit closer to Gabe now, but thank you everyone for tuning into Buffering today. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and share it with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn.